Part 7. The Days in Middle School. There were a lot of documents to submit to the admission process for middle school. I prepared a family register, a certificate of graduation, and a pledge to the school. I then prepared for myself, without anyone else's help, to be ready for school, except to pay for the tuition. I went to the Suwon City Hall by an intercity bus to get a copy of my family register. It was my first time to Suwon, but it never occurred to me that I was born there, and it seemed like a strange foreign land. There was no sense of familiarity with the place where my parents had stayed for a while. I had to buy textbooks, a school uniform, sportswear, and a school bag all together. The school uniform was made by Shinseng Co., and I bought them at Huaxin Department Store in Zhongnou. The new clothes smelled good. Among the textbooks, the most interesting book was the illustrated book of creatures. Whenever I had free time, I looked into that book. The shepherd, or the pointer dog in the book, was the one I always wanted to keep. One day, my father bought a dog. The name of the dog was Carrie, and it was about the size and shape of a shepherd. Friends in the neighborhood called the dog a mixed breed. The dog was so calm and innocent that it didn't look like a male and followed me everywhere. Sadly, one day after a few months when I came from school, Carrie was gone. When I asked my mother, she said she had sold it to the house inside the alley. As soon as I left my bag, I ran to the house. In front of the house, two men had already hung Carrie from the utility pole. The two men beat the struggling Carrie with a club. Many adults said that beating the dog with a club softens the meat when slaughtering it. It was a cruel sight. Carrie foamed at the mouth and shed its feces and urine. The two men killed Carrie with great skill. I was so surprised at the sight. My heart trembled as if I was being beaten to death. I cried for hours when I got home. I could guess that my parents were forced to sell Carrie to raise living expenses for my family. So I couldn't complain, but I just had to cry. My mother, who had been unable to say anything for a long time, consoled me and said, "Usually, animals are raised and eaten at home." I was interested in studying in my middle school life. Furthermore, I had studied major subjects during the night school for about 3 months so I could win the first place in the midterms of the first semester. The total number of students from the day and night classes was 540. My father nailed the wall and put the certificate of honors on top of it. He pulled off the Anika wristwatch he was wearing and gave it to me. I was popular in school after I won the first prize in the whole school. My homeroom teacher nominated me to become vice president in my class. When the exam came, my friends asked me about difficult questions. I couldn't keep my first place. The class president and I took turns winning first place. My homeroom teacher was a female teacher, and she molded me in a way to lead as a model student as class president, vice president in my school days, and head of a department in university. I wrote a letter to my teacher during summer vacation. In that letter, I wrote my plan that I would build a house later when I became an adult and a farm on a rural meadow and invite her. I'd love to invite her if I knew her contact number someday. The Ministry of Education established the Charter of National Education, in which all schools were required to memorize it in a military way. A few days later, at the last hour, the teacher asked the students to raise their hands to memorize the Charter of Education. I was the only one who raised my hand. I still remember most of the contents to this day. We were born in this land under the historic mission of national prosperity. It is time to revive the glow of our ancestors, establish a self-reliant attitude inside, and contribute to the mutual prosperity of all human beings around the world. We will make clear the way we are going forward in this regard and make it an indicator of education. Although I am old, I can still remember the Charter of Education and can even write it down on a white piece of paper. Even when I was alone in the coffee shop waiting for someone, I learned Chinese characters by writing the full text of the Charter of Education in the empty space of the newspaper with these characters. Although the Charter of National Education was said to be a military relic, I thought the Charter of Education was a guideline for the direction we should take and tried to implement it in its entirety. At the end of the charter, the president's name was written on it. I thought President Park Chung-hee himself wrote the Charter of Education after seeing it. I then began to care about the president. On January 21st, 1968, there was a state of emergency to commensurate with the war. 31 armed guerrillas from the 124th Army Unit, a special unit of the North's National Security Agency, had infiltrated Seoul to raid the Blue House, the president's residence. On 3 occasions between October 30th, 1968 and November 2nd, 1968, 120 armed Korean troops infiltrated the Ulsan-Samcheok area, and they engaged in guerrilla warfare for 2 months, killing civilians, including one family. Many people, including civilians, were killed or injured in the incident. About 40 people were killed and 30 others injured. According to the statement of the captured guerrillas, the purpose of their infiltration was to establish a military intelligence network in the minority areas of South Korea and to gather information in various fields, including military, economic, and social affairs. They also said that their purpose was to cross the border with those who were worthy of information. As such, the North Korean regime committed reckless acts to communize the South by force. The North's armed infiltration confused South Korean society, but there was no further confusion as the army, government officer, and civilians all united in dealing with it.